Every century or so, Asia produces a ruler so effective, so transformative, that historians stop arguing and simply agree that one changed the world, not through luck, not through inheritance alone, but through a combination of vision, brutality, patience, and strategic intelligence that most modern leaders study without ever admitting it. We teach Machiavelli in business schools. We teach Sun Tzu in military colleges, but the actual rulers, the ones who built empires that lasted centuries, who unified millions of people who had no interest in being unified, who solved problems so complex that modern governments still haven't cracked them, most people couldn't name 3 of them. Today, that changes. These are Asia's most powerful rulers, and by the end, you'll understand exactly why the lessons they left behind are still taught in boardrooms, war colleges, and political science departments across the world. We study Western history for its philosophers, its revolutions, its democracies. But if you want to understand raw statecraft, the mechanics of holding power together across impossible distances and impossible odds, Asia is where the real curriculum lives. The rulers we're examining today didn't govern small city-states or manageable kingdoms. They governed civilizations, hundreds of millions of people, thousands of miles of territory, dozens of languages, religions, and ethnic groups, all pulling in different directions. And they held it together. The conventional story of Asian rulers tends to go one of 2 ways. Either they're portrayed as exotic despots, mysterious and cruel, or they're flattened into a paragraph in a world history textbook. Neither does them justice. What actually made these rulers remarkable wasn't their cruelty or their mystique. It was their problem solving. Each one faced a version of the same fundamental challenge. How do you create lasting order out of chaos? How do you build something that outlives you? How do you make power stick? We're examining 5 rulers across roughly 2,000 years of Asian history. Each one solved that problem differently. Each solution still echoes today. Start with the man who invented China. In 221 BC, Ying Zheng, the king of the Qin state, completed what 7 generations of his ancestors had attempted and failed. He conquered the remaining 6 warring states of ancient China and unified them under a single ruler for the first time in history. He gave himself a new title to mark the occasion, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. But the unification itself wasn't the remarkable part. Plenty of conquerors have unified territories by force. What made Qin Shi Huang genuinely extraordinary was what came next. He understood that military conquest is the easy part. Administration is where empires live or die. Within years of unification, he standardized the written Chinese script so that a bureaucrat in the north and a merchant in the south could communicate in the same language. He standardized weights and measures, axle widths for carts, even the width of roads. He built 4,000 miles of imperial highways, radiating from his capital like a nervous system. He abolished the feudal aristocracy that had destabilized China for centuries and replaced it with a merit-based bureaucracy, radical for 221 BC, foundational for everything that followed. Modern China's centralized administrative structure, its emphasis on standardization, its instinct for infrastructure as statecraft, these aren't modern inventions. They're 2,200 years old. When Xi Jinping speaks about national unity, when China builds highways into remote provinces or mandates standardized education across 56 ethnic groups, the template for that thinking was written by a man buried beneath a mountain with 8,000 terracotta soldiers. The first emperor died in 210 BC. His dynasty collapsed within 15 years, but the state he designed, the idea of China as a unified, centrally administered civilization, never died again. That's the measure of real power. Not how long you rule, but how long your ideas rule after you. Now consider someone who should never have held power at all, and held it better than almost anyone. Wu Zetian entered the Tang imperial court at age 14 as a minor concubine to Emperor Taizong. By the standards of 7th century China, her story should have ended there, either forgotten in a palace or retired to a Buddhist convent when the emperor died, as convention demanded. Instead, she navigated one of history's most treacherous political environments with a combination of intelligence, patience, and ruthlessness that left observers, hostile and admiring alike, simply astonished. She leveraged relationships, built coalitions, eliminated rivals with surgical precision, and in 690 AD did something no woman had done before or since in Chinese history. She declared herself emperor, not empress consort. Emperor. She ruled for 15 years in her own name, and by most measurable standards, ruled well. She expanded China's territories. She reformed the imperial examination system, opening it to talented men from lower classes and creating a new class of bureaucrats personally loyal to her rather than to old aristocratic families. She patronized Buddhism as a counterweight to Confucian patriarchal tradition. The harvests were good, the borders held, the treasury was full. Modern leadership researchers study Wu Zetian specifically because she operated without any of the structural advantages that typically explain political success. She had no military background. She had no family network of sufficient power. She had no precedent to legitimize her authority. Everything she achieved came from reading people, understanding incentives, and building loyalty through demonstrated competence. There is an emerging school of management theory, particularly in East Asian business culture, that explicitly draws on Wu Zetian's model. How do you lead when the system wasn't designed for you? Her answer was, redesign the system. She died in 705 AD, at approximately 80 years old, still in power. That alone is a masterclass. The name Genghis Khan still triggers a reflex: barbarism, destruction, terror. And that reflex is exactly wrong about what made him powerful. Yes, the Mongol conquests killed millions. The destruction of cities like Merv and Nishapur stands as some of the most devastating violence in pre-modern history. That suffering was real, and it shouldn't be minimized. But if you want to understand why Genghis Khan, born Temujin, the orphaned son of a minor tribal chief, built the largest contiguous land empire in human history, you have to look past the violence to the system underneath it. Temujin rose to power by doing something genuinely radical for 12th century steppe culture. He broke the clan system. Mongol society organized itself by blood loyalty. You fought for your tribe, your family, your lineage. Temujin reorganized his army by merit and loyalty to him personally, not by birth. He promoted men who had demonstrated competence regardless of their origin. He incorporated defeated enemies into his forces rather than simply killing them. He built a military structure, the decimal system of tens, hundreds, thousands, that could operate across vast distances with extraordinary coordination. He also built the Yam, a Pony Express relay system stretching across the entire empire, arguably the most sophisticated communication network the world had seen to that point. The Mongol Empire at its height enabled trade and communication across Eurasia on a scale that wouldn't be matched for centuries. The Silk Road functioned. Scholars, merchants, and diplomats moved relatively freely. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, created conditions for cultural exchange that shaped the Renaissance. Modern military doctrine still studies Mongol tactics: speed, deception, psychological warfare, the use of feigned retreat to lure enemies into unfavorable terrain. When business strategists talk about disruption, moving fast, breaking established structures, rewarding talent over seniority, they are, knowingly or not, describing what Temujin built on the steppe 8 centuries ago. A century before Europe's age of exploration, one Chinese emperor was already rewriting the map of the known world. Zhu Di, the Yongle emperor, seized the Ming throne in 1402 through one of history's most audacious coups, overthrowing his own nephew in a civil war he wasn't supposed to win. He spent the rest of his reign trying to build a legacy grand enough to outlast that illegitimate beginning. He moved China's capital from Nanjing to Beijing and constructed the Forbidden City, still standing, still one of the most extraordinary architectural achievements in human history. He commissioned the Yongle Dadian, the largest encyclopedia ever assembled to that point, containing virtually all Chinese knowledge from mathematics to medicine. And he sent Admiral Zheng He on 7 massive naval expeditions between 1405 and 1433, commanding fleets of hundreds of ships that traveled to Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and the coast of East Africa. These weren't exploratory voyages in the Western sense. They were diplomatic missions designed to demonstrate Ming power, collect tribute, and embed China at the center of Asian trade networks. The Yongle emperor understood something about geopolitics that modern states still apply: presence creates power. Showing up matters. When China sends infrastructure investment to African and Southeast Asian nations today, when it builds ports and highways and railways from Kenya to Cambodia, it is, consciously or not, replicating the Yongle model. Soft power projected through presence and economic relationship, not purely through military force. The emperor died in 1424 on a military campaign in Mongolia. His successors, cautious and inward-looking, eventually burned the fleet. But the network he built, the relationships, the trade routes, the cultural connections, those persisted long after the ships were gone. And then there's the man who proves that sometimes the most powerful thing a ruler can do is wait. Tokugawa Ieyasu spent 40 years watching, learning, losing, and surviving. He served under Nobunaga. He allied with Hideyoshi. He watched both of them rise to near total power over Japan, and both of them failed to secure it past their own deaths. When Hideyoshi died in 1598, leaving an infant heir and a power vacuum, Ieyasu moved, carefully, precisely, and overwhelmingly. At the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, he destroyed his remaining rivals. In 1603, he became shogun. Then he did something that revealed his real genius. He engineered a system specifically designed to prevent anyone from doing to his heirs what he had done to his predecessors. The Sankin-Kotai system required feudal lords to spend alternating years in Edo, Ieyasu's capital, and in their home domains, keeping their families in Edo permanently as hostages. It created a nation of lords perpetually drained by travel costs and perpetually vulnerable. The Tokugawa shogunate lasted 268 years. Political science departments teach Ieyasu as a case study in institutional design, building structures that outlast the builder. The lesson he embodies is one that modern executives and political leaders struggle with constantly: the Heian. Their best problem isn't winning, it's making the win permanent. 5 rulers, 5 different civilizations, dynasties, and centuries. But line them up and something striking appears. None of them succeeded primarily through force alone. Qin Shi Huang conquered China militarily in 11 years. He then spent the rest of his reign governing it. The standardization, the administration, the infrastructure. That's where his real legacy was built. Wu Zetian never commanded an army herself. Genghis Khan's military genius was real, but what he built that lasted was a system of merit, communication, and trade. The Yongle Emperor's most enduring act wasn't conquering the throne. It was projecting presence across half the world. Tokugawa Ieyasu's greatest achievement wasn't the battle he won, but the institutions he designed afterward. The pattern is consistent across geography, culture, and century. Power earned through conquest is unstable. Power embedded in systems, institutions, and ideas is what lasts. Here's the second pattern, and this one directly explains why modern leaders still study these figures. Every one of them understood that loyalty must be engineered, not assumed. Qin Shi Huang replaced hereditary aristocrats with merit-selected bureaucrats loyal to the state. Wu Zetian opened the examination system to create a class loyal to her personally. Genghis Khan built an army loyal to him rather than to tribal bloodlines. The Yongle Emperor tied vassal states to China through economic relationships. Tokugawa Ieyasu kept his rivals financially exhausted and their families hostage. These aren't just ancient strategies. Walk into any modern government, any major corporation, any political party, and you will find versions of all 5 of these loyalty engineering mechanisms operating simultaneously. The tactics look different. The underlying logic is identical. There's a third thread that runs through all 5, and it's perhaps the most uncomfortable one. Every ruler here was willing to do things that violated the norms of their time to achieve results. Qin Shi Huang burned books and buried scholars. Wu Zetian eliminated rivals in ways that shocked even her contemporaries. Genghis Khan offered cities the choice of surrender or annihilation. The Yongle Emperor seized the throne from his own nephew. Tokugawa Ieyasu spent decades making and breaking alliances of convenience. None of this makes them models of virtue, but it does raise a question that political philosophy has wrestled with since Machiavelli, and long before him. Is there a relationship between the willingness to break rules and the capacity to build lasting order? History keeps suggesting yes. It keeps refusing to settle the moral question. Modern leadership theory talks about vision, execution, and legacy, as if these are new concepts that consultants invented in the 20th century. Qin Shi Huang had a vision in 221 BC. One China, one script, one administrative system. He executed it in a decade. The legacy is still functioning 22 centuries later. Wu Zetian had vision, execution, and a legacy that forced Chinese history to permanently reckon with the question of who deserves power. Genghis Khan's vision of connected Eurasian trade literally reshaped the world economy. What's worth sitting with isn't just their achievements, it's their relevance. These rulers aren't studied because historians find them interesting. They're studied because the problems they solved, how to unify diverse people, how to project power across distance, how to build loyalty that outlasts the individual, how to design institutions that survive their creators, are the same problems that governments, militaries, and organizations face today. The settings have changed, the technology has changed, the fundamental challenge of organized human power has not changed at all, which raises the question that doesn't have a clean answer. In an era of democratic norms, international law, and human rights frameworks, what do we actually do with the knowledge that history's most effective rulers were frequently its most ruthless ones? Does effectiveness justify the methods? Or does the human cost disqualify the lesson? It's not a rhetorical question. It's the central tension in every serious political science department, every serious military ethics course, every serious conversation about how power actually works versus how we wish it worked. I'd genuinely like to know where you land on that. Leave your answer below.